Billionaire opens the pantry and sees the maid eating leftovers hidden. What he does. Richard Thompson froze at the pantry door at 2 in the morning. His trusted maid, Helen Carter, was there in the dark, devouring dinner leftovers with trembling hands. Tears streamed down her thin face as she desperately ate the leftover chicken pieces. The noise of the plate falling to the floor echoed through the silent kitchen when she saw him standing in the doorway. Richard watched her bony hands and the navy blue uniform that seemed too loose on her increasingly thin body. Helen had worked for 3 years at the Beverly Hills mansion, always impeccable and professional, but there she was, trembling with shame. "Mr. Richard, I can explain," Helen stammered, trying to wipe away tears with the back of her hand. "Helen, for God's sake, what's going on here?" Richard turned on the kitchen light, revealing the state of the woman who took care of his home. The hollow cheeks, the eyes with deep dark circles, the uniform that once fit her perfectly now hung loose on her shoulders. Helen begged not to be fired, the words tumbling out. "Please, Mr. Richard, I need this job. I know it was wrong, but I had nothing left to eat at home and—" "Helen, stop!" Richard raised his hand, confused. "Are you telling me you have no food at home? How is that? I pay your salary on time." The woman lowered her eyes, ashamed. She then revealed that she sent every penny of her salary to her hometown Asheville in rural North Carolina. Richard demanded explanations, and Helen began to cry harder. "I take care of 15 abandoned elderly, Mr. Richard. They have no one. I send everything I earn here to pay for a house there, food, medicine, and I only eat the leftovers to save every penny." Richard felt a lump in his throat. Helen continued explaining that she lived only on what was left from her employer's table, sleeping only 4 hours a night because she woke up at dawn to cook before coming to work. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. 15 elderly? Helen, how can you support 15 people on one salary? Richard couldn't believe what he was hearing. "They call me an angel, but I'm no angel. I'm just a daughter who can't bear to see the elderly in need." Helen wiped her nose on her uniform sleeve. "There's Mr. John, 85 years old, who was abandoned by his son. Mrs. Mary, 90, whose family dumped her in a nursing home and never showed up again. Mr. Anthony, who lost his home in a flood." Helen's voice broke. Richard realized she was at her limit, physically and emotionally exhausted. He asked for the address of the place where the elderly lived, intrigued by the story. "Why did you never tell me this, Helen? Why didn't you ask for help? Pride doesn't feed anyone, Mr. Richard, but dignity keeps the soul in place. I don't want charity. I just want to work honestly to take care of my elderly." The next day, Richard decided to visit Asheville without telling anyone. The 3-hour car ride to the countryside made him reflect on his own life. Owner of one of the country's largest construction companies, he had never thought about using his fortune for anything beyond more profit. Arriving at the address Helen had given, he found a simple 3-bedroom house in a humble neighborhood. The gate was open and he could hear elderly voices talking in the yard. When he rang the bell, an elderly lady with a cane came to answer. "Who are you looking for?" asked Mrs. Grace suspiciously. "I'm Helen's employer. I came to meet you all." The reaction was immediate. Grace called all the other elderly people who came limping, some in wheelchairs, others leaning on canes. They all looked at Richard with a mix of gratitude and protectiveness. "Are you our Helen's boss?" asked Mr. John, a gentleman with a white beard. "She's an angel, sir. Without her, we'd have left this life long ago." Richard spent 2 hours listening to their stories. Mrs. Mary told how Helen would even spend her transportation vouchers on medicine for them. Mr. Anthony revealed that she arrived every weekend loaded with groceries, always with a smile on her face even when exhausted. "She sleeps on the living room floor when she comes here, you know," said Grace. "She says a bed is a luxury and that old folks need comfort more than she does." The house conditions were precarious but organized. 15 beds crammed into the bedrooms, a small but clean kitchen, a simple bathroom. Richard mentally calculated the expenses and realized Helen was spending far more than she earned. How does she manage to maintain all this? She cleans houses on weekends, explained Mr. John, and sometimes she goes without food to have enough for us. How many times have we found her fainting from hunger? Richard returned to New York City with a heavy heart. The next morning, he confronted Helen about not asking for help. Helen, you're killing yourself. Literally. Your skin and bones. Mr. Richard, you don't understand. I don't want charity. I want to work to support my family. But they're not your biological family, are they? Helen stopped arranging the dishes and looked out the window. A tear rolled down her face. Do you have family, Mr. Richard? I have my wife, Jennifer. And would you do anything for her? Of course. Then you understand. Those elderly folks are my family. They took me in when I had nothing, gave me purpose when I was lost. Now it's my turn to take care of them. Richard offered a substantial raise, but Helen flatly refused. I don't accept handouts, Mr. Richard. If you want to help me, give me more work. I can cook for you and Mrs. Jennifer on weekends. I can do extra cleaning, anything. But I work for what I earn. Richard's wife, Jennifer, discovered the situation when she overheard the conversation. A cold and materialistic woman, she became furious upon learning the housekeeper was stealing food from the house. Richard, you're being deceived. This woman is a user. She made up this story to steal our food and still get a raise. Jennifer, I visited the place. I saw the elderly. The story is true. I don't care. I won't accept a thief in my house. Either you fire her now or I'll hire another housekeeper myself. The argument lasted through the night. Jennifer revealed a coldness Richard had never noticed in their 15 years of marriage. She threatened to lock the pantry and forbid any leftovers for Helen. Are you choosing a housekeeper over your own wife? Shouted Jennifer. I'm choosing humanity over cruelty, replied Richard, surprised by his own response. The next day, Helen fainted during her shift. Richard took her to the family doctor, who confirmed what he already suspected: severe malnutrition. She's been on the verge of collapse for months, explained the doctor. Her body is consuming its own muscle mass. If this continues, there could be irreversible consequences. While Helen recovered, Richard investigated more about her past. He discovered she had been a doctor in her home country, El Salvador, but her degree wasn't recognized in the United States. She had fled the economic crisis with only the clothes on her back. "Why did you never tell me you were a doctor?" he asked when she woke up in the hospital. "What for?" "Here, I'm just a housekeeper. And that's fine. I'd rather clean houses with dignity than live on pity." Jennifer stormed into the hospital, announcing she had already hired another maid and that Helen was fired. "You embarrassed me in front of my friends," she yelled at Helen. "How dare you make my husband spend money on you?" "Jennifer, stop." Richard stepped between them. "Helen didn't ask for anything. I was the one who brought her here. Then choose, her or me." Helen, still weak, tried to get up from the bed. "Mrs. Jennifer, you don't need to worry. I was already thinking about leaving anyway. I don't want to cause problems in your marriage." "Helen, you're not leaving." Richard looked firmly at his wife. "Jennifer, we need to talk." That night, the couple had the most serious argument of their 15 years of marriage. Jennifer revealed a coldness that frightened Richard. "You've changed, Richard. Ever since you started worrying about this maid, you've been different. More distant from me." "Maybe I've realized who we really are, Jennifer. Helen sacrifices herself for people she didn't even know before. We have more money than we could spend in a lifetime, and we've never helped anyone. I didn't marry a social worker. I married a successful businessman who knew the value of money, and I didn't marry a heartless woman." Jennifer moved to the guest room. The marriage was definitely shaken, but Richard felt a strange peace. For the first time in years, he was doing something that made sense. Helen returned to work against medical orders. Richard began leaving forgotten full lunchboxes in the kitchen, pretending he had ordered too much at the restaurant. Helen noticed but maintained a dignified silence about his gestures. A month later, Richard received a call that would change everything. One of the elderly from the makeshift nursing home, Mr. Francis, had suffered a heart attack and needed urgent surgery. The cost $50,000. Helen sold her only valuable possession, a ring that had belonged to her late mother, but only managed to get $10,000. Richard found her crying alone in the mansion's backyard after receiving the news that the amount wasn't enough. "Helen, what happened?" Between sobs, she told him about Mr. Francis, the old man who had taken her in when she arrived in the United States, who taught her English, who had become like a father to her. "He's going to pass away, Mr. Richard, and I can't save him. What kind of daughter am I?" Richard felt his heart break. The next day he anonymously paid for the surgery, but Helen found out through the donor description the hospital provided. "Why did you do this?" Helen confronted him, more furious than grateful. "Because it was the right thing to do." "Charity humiliates me, Mr. Richard. I'm not a beggar." "And humanity honors me, Helen. You taught me that money only has value when it saves lives." Jennifer discovered the surgery payment when reviewing the bank statements. The explosion was inevitable. $50,000 for some unknown old man. You've completely lost your mind. Jennifer threw the papers in her husband's face. "I want a divorce. I don't recognize the man I married anymore." "Nor do I recognize the woman I married," Richard replied calmly. "When did we become such empty people?" "I'm not empty. I just have the right priorities. Our family comes first." "Our family?" "Jennifer, when was the last time you asked how my day was? When was the last time we hugged without it being a social obligation? We've become strangers sharing a house." The truth hurt, but it needed to be said. The marriage had been dead for years. Neither of them had just had the courage to admit it. Helen resigned to avoid causing more problems for her employer. Richard flatly refused. "Helen, you opened my eyes to what really matters in life. I won't let you leave." "But my wife has already made her decision, and I made my decision. I have a proposal for you." Richard had been thinking a lot in recent days. He owned an abandoned property in Asheville, a farm he inherited from his father and never knew what to do with. The idea was to turn it into a dignified home for the elderly. "I want you to manage a care center, a place where the elderly have dignity, medical care, proper nutrition. You would be the coordinator, with a salary matching your qualifications." Helen cried for the first time in front of him, not from sadness, but from relief and gratitude. "Mr. Richard, I don't know how to thank you. Accepting that sometimes receiving help isn't humiliation, it's an opportunity to do more for others." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Jennifer officially filed for divorce the following week. During the process, Richard discovered she had been in a relationship for 2 years with a partner from her decoration company. The revelation didn't surprise or hurt him. In fact, he felt relief. "How long have you been unhappy with us, Jennifer?" "For a long time, Richard. We both know this marriage ended years ago. We were just pretending for convenience. At least now we can be honest with each other." The divorce process went smoothly, without major conflicts. Jennifer kept the house in Beverly Hills and half of the assets. Richard moved to a smaller, cozier apartment in Greenwich Village. Meanwhile, the care center project took shape. Richard hired a team of architects to renovate the farm, turning it into a dignified and functional space. Helen oversaw every detail, suggesting modifications based on the real needs of the elderly. "We want it to be a home, not an institution," Helen explained to the architects. "Each one needs their own little corner, their privacy, but also common areas." The renovation took 6 months. During this period, Richard visited Asheville every week, monitoring the progress and getting to know the elderly Helen cared for better. Each had a story of abandonment, but also of overcoming. Mr. Francis, recovered from surgery, became especially close to Richard. The old man had been a carpenter and helped supervise the renovation, offering valuable tips based on decades of experience. "You're a good man," Francis said one day. "Our Helen chose the right boss to trust." "Actually, Francis, it was Helen who chose me to be a better person." During one of the visits, Richard witnessed something that would mark him forever. Helen was taking care of Mrs. Elizabeth, an 87-year-old lady who had developed dementia. The woman hadn't recognized anyone for months, but when Helen approached, Mrs. Elizabeth smiled. "My daughter has arrived," said the old woman, stroking Helen's face. "Yes, Mother, I'm here," Helen replied gently, even though she knew Mrs. Elizabeth wasn't her biological mother. Richard understood at that moment the true definition of family. It wasn't blood that united those people, but love, care, and mutual dedication. The care centre was inaugurated on a sunny Saturday morning. Helen had insisted on a simple ceremony, just with the elderly, some neighbours, and Richard. No press or publicity. "We don't want it to become a tourist attraction," Helen explained. "We want them to have peace." The final result exceeded all expectations. Single and double rooms, a spacious common area, a library, a community garden, a medical office, and an infirmary. Helen had managed to revalidate her medical degree and could now officially care for the elderly. "How do you feel, Dr. Helen?" Richard joked on Inauguration Day. "As if I were finally in the right place," she replied, watching the elderly explore their new home. In the following months, the centre became a reference in the region. Helen implemented occupational activities, physical therapy, and even a choir formed by the residents themselves. The change in the elderly's quality of life was visible. Richard visited every week, sometimes staying the entire weekend. He helped with activities, talked with the elderly, learned from their life experiences. For the first time, he felt his existence had a purpose beyond accumulating wealth. One day, while helping old Francis tend to the garden, the old man asked a question that made him reflect deeply. "Mr. Richard, have you ever been truly happy in your life?" "What do you mean, Francis?" "Happy to wake up in the morning and be thankful to be alive. Happy to look in the mirror and like who you see. Happy to sleep with a clear conscience." Richard thought about the question for days. He realized that before meeting Helen, he had been living on autopilot. He worked to earn money, earned money to buy things, bought things to impress people, an empty and meaningless cycle. "You know, Francis, I think I only started being happy when I stopped thinking only about myself." 3 months after the inauguration, Helen received a call that shook her deeply. Her biological mother, who lived in El Salvador, was very ill and wanted to see her one last time. "I need to go, Mr. Richard, but I can't leave the elderly alone. Helen, you have a right to your personal life. We'll figure out how to keep everything running while you're away." "It's just—" Helen hesitated. "I don't have the money for the ticket." Richard immediately offered to pay for the trip, but Helen refused. They reached an agreement. She would work part-time at his apartment in New York City to earn the extra money needed. During the weeks Helen split her time between New York City and Asheville, Richard realized how important her presence had become in his life. Not romantically, but as a deep and genuine friendship. Helen managed to save up for the trip, but before leaving, something happened that would change everything again. During a routine visit to the center, the doctor monitoring the elderly made a disturbing discovery. "Dr. Helen, we need to talk in private." The doctor had noticed that one of the elderly, old Benjamin, showed signs that weren't from natural aging. After more detailed exams, they discovered he was being slowly poisoned. "Poisoned? How?" Helen was in shock. "Someone is putting small doses of a medication in his food. In small quantities it doesn't kill, but it's causing the symptoms we observed." The discovery led to a discreet investigation. Helen and Richard found out that Benjamin had a son who visited rarely but always brought sweets for his father. The man was trying to speed up his father's departure to inherit a small rural property. "How can someone do this to their own father?" Helen cried with anger and sadness. "Unfortunately, there are people who see the elderly as a burden, not as human beings," replied Richard. They discreetly confronted the son, who denied everything at first. But when Richard threatened to involve the authorities, the man confessed and promised never to approach his father again. "What do we do now?" asked Helen. "We protect old Benjamin and never let that man near him again." The episode deeply shook Helen, who cancelled her trip to stay close to the elderly. Richard convinced her to reschedule for the following month, assuring her that he himself would be on duty at the center. "Helen, your mother needs you, and the elderly will be safe, I promise." Finally, Helen traveled to El Salvador. 2 weeks later, she returned with red eyes but at peace. "How was it?" asked Richard. "She passed away 3 days before I returned, but I managed to say goodbye, ask forgiveness for leaving, tell her I loved her." Helen cried softly. "She was proud of me, of what I've done here in the United States. She said I'd found my life's purpose, Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us just starting out. Now continuing. The following months brought growth and consolidation to the project. The shelter centre gained recognition from local authorities and became a model for other similar initiatives. Helen was invited to speak at universities about elderly care. Richard, in turn, found new direction for his professional life. He began focusing his construction company on social projects, creating decent affordable housing and community centres. The company's profits decreased, but it gained purpose. "Don't you miss the old life?" Helen asked one day as they walked through the centre's garden. "I miss feeling important because I had money, but I prefer feeling important by making a difference in people's lives." "You've changed a lot, Mr. Richard. Stop calling me Mr. We're partners in this project. We're friends. Call me Richard." "All right. Richard, you've changed a lot. You taught me that wealth isn't what you have, but what you're able to give. And the more I give, the richer I feel." 1 year after the centre's opening, news arrived that would test Helen's strength once again. The local government was considering expropriating the land for a highway project. "They can't do this," Helen was outraged. "The elderly have already settled in, formed bonds. I can't put them through another traumatic move." Richard used all his contacts and resources to fight the expropriation. He hired lawyers, mobilized the press, organized peaceful demonstrations. The fight lasted 6 months. "Why are you doing all this?" Helen asked during one of the public hearings. "You could simply build another center elsewhere." "Because sometimes the fight isn't just about the outcome, but about principles. These seniors deserve stability, and you deserve to have your work respected." The victory came on a Friday afternoon. The highway project was cancelled, and the center received indefinite tenure. Helen cried with relief in Richard's arms. "Thank you for fighting for us. Thank you for teaching me what's worth fighting for." 2 years after the story began, the center housed not 15 but 25 seniors. Helen had assembled a team of nurses and caregivers, all trained by her. The place became a benchmark for humane care. Richard visited every weekend, participating in activities and becoming part of the family. The elderly affectionately called him Dr. Richard, even though he explained he wasn't a physician. "To us, you're a doctor of the heart," said Mrs. Grace. "You take care of our Helen, and she takes care of us." One special Sunday, Helen organized a party to celebrate the center's 2nd anniversary. All the seniors were present, some family members who kept in touch, neighbors and staff. During the party, Mr. Francis asked to speak. "I wanted to thank 2 very special people," said the old man, leaning on his cane. "Our Dr. Helen, who saved our lives when no one else cared about us, and Dr. Richard, who saved our Helen when she was losing herself by caring for others too much." Applause echoed through the hall. Helen and Richard looked at each other, both moved. "You 2 taught us that family isn't blood, it's choice. And we choose you as our family." That night after the party, Helen and Richard walked through the center's garden talking about the future. "Sometimes I can't believe how much has changed," said Helen. 2 years ago, I was eating leftovers in hiding, dying of shame. Today, I have a job I love, people who respect me, a clear purpose in life. And I, 2 years ago, was an empty man, married to a woman I didn't love, accumulating money without knowing why. Today, I wake up every day eager to come here, to see the elderly folks' smiles, to work by your side. Have you never thought about," Helen hesitated, "about starting your own family, having children?" Richard reflected for a moment. "I have a family, 25 grandfathers and grandmothers who adopted me, a best friend who teaches me every day to be a better person, a purpose that makes me get out of bed happy. I don't need anything else. I feel the same way, complete, fulfilled. I never thought it would be possible." 3 years later, the center had expanded again. Now it served not only abandoned elderly, but also offered a day center for seniors in the community, where families could leave their relatives during the day knowing they would be well cared for. Helen had become a national reference in gerontology, writing articles and teaching courses. Richard had transformed his construction company into a firm focused exclusively on social projects. "You know what the biggest irony of all this was?" said Richard one afternoon, while they watched the elderly playing dominoes. What? When I had a lot of money and thought only of myself, I was miserable. Now that I spend everything helping others, I feel like the richest man in the world. I think you finally understood what true wealth is. I learned from the best teacher. One Saturday morning, 4 years after that night in the pantry, Helen arrived at the center with special news. Richard, I need to tell you something important. What is it? You look like you're about to give me good news. I received an invitation to open a second center in Boston. The state government wants to replicate our model. Richard felt a pang in his chest. The thought of Helen moving away frightened him more than he expected. And are you going to accept? Only if you come with me. We're a team, don't you remember? Richard's smile lit up his face. Of course I'll go, but what about the elderly folks here? I've already thought about that. We can train new professionals to take over this center. Our mission isn't just to care for these seniors, but to teach others to care too. The expansion to Boston took another year of planning. This time, Helen and Richard involved the original center's own elderly residents in the project, asking for suggestions and improvements based on their experience. You are the true experts, said Helen during a meeting. Who better than you to say what works and what doesn't? Mr. Francis, now 89 years old but still sharp, became the project's official consultant. I want every elderly person who arrives at the new center to feel at home from day one, he said. No sterile white hospital rooms. There has to be color, there has to be life. The second center was inaugurated with a big celebration. Helen moved to Boston to coordinate the new project, while Richard divided his time between the two cities. The distance was difficult, but the mission was greater than personal hardships. I miss you when I'm in New York City, confessed Richard during a phone call. Me too. But think of how many elderly folks will be able to help with 2 centers running. You're right. It's for them that we do all this. 5 years after that night in the pantry, the Helen Carter Richard Thompson Foundation, name chosen by the elderly themselves, operated 4 centers in 3 states, serving over 100 seniors and providing decent employment for 50 people. Helen had become a respected personality in the field of gerontology, but never lost her humility or connection with hands-on work. Every morning, no matter which center she was visiting, she made a point of greeting each elderly person personally. Richard had sold his construction company and was now fully dedicated to the foundation. His business experience was essential for managing resources and the sustainable expansion of projects. Sometimes I wonder, Helen said one afternoon as they sat in the garden of the original center, what would have happened if you hadn't opened that pantry that early morning? I'd probably still be an empty businessman, and you'd still be working yourself to death alone. Do you think it was fate? I think it was one good person finding another good person at the right time. And when that happens, the world gets a little better. Mrs. Grace, now 92 years old, approached leaning on her wheelchair. What are you two talking about? About how it all began, Mrs. Grace, Helen replied. Oh yes, the night our Helen got caught eating the leftovers, the old woman smiled mischievously. You know that wasn't an accident, right? Helen and Richard exchanged confused glances. What do you mean, Mrs. Grace? Richard asked. I was talking to Helen on the phone that afternoon. She was crying because she hadn't managed to eat anything all day. I told her that sometimes God puts us in the strangest places to find the angels we need. You suggested she go look for food in the pantry. Helen was stunned. I said if she was so worried about bothering her boss, she should at least try to be discreet. I never imagined he'd show up right at that moment, Mrs. Grace laughed, but I think it was exactly what needed to happen. Helen and Richard laughed together, realizing how mysterious life's paths can be. So it was you who changed our lives, Richard said. No, my child, you two changed each other's lives. I just gave a little nudge. 6 years later, during an awards ceremony in Washington, D.C., where the foundation received national recognition, Helen gave a speech that moved the audience. 6 years ago, I was a desperate woman eating leftovers hidden in a pantry. Today, I'm here representing hundreds of elderly people who found dignity and love in their final years of life. This transformation was only possible because someone chose to see humanity where others saw only a hungry maid. Richard was in the audience, applauding with tears in his eyes. But the most important thing I've learned over these years is that saving lives isn't a single heroic act. It's a daily choice to put others' well-being above your own comfort. It's discovering that true wealth lies in how many people you can help smile again. After the ceremony in their Washington, D.C. hotel, Helen and Richard discussed the Foundation's next steps. "Have you ever thought about stopping?" Richard asked. "We've done so much, helped so many people. You deserve to rest." "Rest?" Helen laughed. "Richard, as long as there's one abandoned elderly person in the United States, I won't rest. And I know you won't either." "You're right. I guess this has become our addiction. The best addiction in the world, helping people." On the 7th anniversary of the first center, they organized a special party. They invited all the elderly who had been through the centers, family members, staff, authorities, and the press. During the party, Mr. Francis, now 92 years old, asked to make a special speech. "My children and grandchildren," he said, referring to Helen and Richard, "you saved more than our lives. You saved our dignity, our hope, our will to live. Today I want to make a request of you." Helen and Richard approached, curious. "I want you to get married." The hall fell silent. Helen and Richard looked at each other, surprised. "Mr. Francis," Helen began, "let me finish, my dear. You two have loved each other for years, and pretend it's just friendship. You work together, dream together, fight together. You complete each other in a way only those in love can. Why not admit it?" The other seniors started applauding and shouting support. Helen and Richard were red with embarrassment, but couldn't stop smiling. "So," shouted Grace, "are you going to let some old folks die without seeing this wedding?" That night, walking alone through the garden after the party, Helen and Richard finally talked about what they felt for each other. "Do you think your Francis is right?" Richard asked timidly. "About what?" Helen pretended not to understand. "About us loving each other for years and pretending it's just friendship." Helen stopped walking and looked into Richard's eyes. "And if he's right, what would that change?" "It would mean I could finally tell you that you're the most important person in my life. That my days only make sense when I'm by your side. That I love not just what you do, but who you are. And I could tell you that you saved me from a life of sacrifice without recognition, and gave me a purpose greater than myself. That I trust you more than anyone in the world. That I love you too." They kissed for the first time there, in the garden of the center where it all began, surrounded by the plants the seniors cultivated with such care. "So, shall we get married?" Richard asked, still holding Helen in his arms. "Yes, but I want a simple ceremony here at the center with our true family present." "Our true family?" "The seniors, of course. They brought us together. They'll bless us." The wedding happened 3 months later, in an emotional ceremony in the original center's garden. Francis was the one who walked Helen to Richard. Grace was the matron of honor. All seniors from the 4 centers were invited and attended. "Today we're not just celebrating the union of Helen and Richard," said the priest during the ceremony. "We're celebrating how love can transform lives, communities, and the world." After exchanging rings, Helen and Richard made special vows. "I promise to stand by your side, not just as a wife, but as a partner in our mission, to bring dignity and love to those who need it most," said Helen. "And I promise our family will keep growing, not just with children we might have, but with every senior we welcome and every life we manage to touch," promised Richard. Applause echoed through the garden. The seniors cried with emotion. Helen and Richard kissed, sealing not just their love, but their commitment to continue the mission that had brought them together. For their honeymoon, instead of traveling to exotic destinations, they visited the 4 foundation centers, spending a few days at each, celebrating with every senior family they had formed. "This is the perfect honeymoon," said Helen, dancing with Francis at the party organized at the Boston Center. "Surrounded by our true family," agreed Richard, spinning Grace in her wheelchair. 1 year after the wedding, Helen discovered she was pregnant. The news was met with celebration in all centers. The seniors organized themselves to make baby clothes, each contributing what they could. "This child will be the most loved in the world," said Grace, knitting tiny booties. "She'll have 95 grandparents to care for her." When little Hope was born, name chosen by the seniors themselves, she was first introduced to the seniors at the original centre. The emotional scene of seniors holding the baby with trembling but caring hands was forever engraved in Helen and Richard's hearts. "Look," whispered Francis, holding Hope in his arms, "the first child of our giant family." 2 years later, Gabriel was born, and 3 years after that, Charity arrived. The 3 children literally grew up surrounded by loving grandfathers and grandmothers, learning from a young age about respect, care and love for the elderly. "Mummy, why do we have so many grandpas and grandmas?" asked Hope, then 6 years old. "Because when you truly love people, they become your family even without being blood relatives," explained Helen. "And because your parents learned that family isn't who you're born with, but who chooses to stay with you," added Richard. 10 years after that night in the pantry, the Helen Carter Richard Thompson Foundation operated 12 centers in 7 states, had trained hundreds of professionals specialized in elderly care, and had served over 1,000 people. Helen had become an international reference, giving lectures at universities worldwide about dignified aging. Richard had transformed his business knowledge into expertise in managing social organizations. But what made them proudest wasn't the numbers or recognition. It was the fact that none of the elderly they had taken in felt abandoned. Everyone had family, purpose, and dignity. "You know what the greatest irony of this whole story is?" said Helen one afternoon, watching the children play with the elderly in the garden. "What?" "I went hungry to feed abandoned elderly people. Today, our children will never know what abandonment is because they have dozens of people who love them unconditionally." The circle closed perfectly. More than perfect. Our children are learning that aging isn't a burden, but an achievement, that the elderly aren't disposable, but living libraries full of wisdom. That night, on the 10th anniversary of the original centre, they organised a special party. Many of the original elderly were no longer present, having passed away peacefully over the years, but their memories and teachings remained alive. Mr. Francis, now 97 and a bit more fragile, insisted on giving a final speech. "My dear children," he said, his voice choked, "I will be leaving soon. It's natural. It's the cycle of life. But I want you to know that I leave in peace." Helen held the old man's hand, crying. "When you met in that pantry, God was writing a beautiful story, a story about how love can transform despair into hope, abandonment into family, darkness into light." "Mr. Francis," Helen couldn't speak. "Let me finish, my daughter. You didn't just save our lives, you saved our souls. You gave us back the dignity the world had taken from us. You made us remember that we were still important, still loved." Richard was also crying, holding the old man's other hand. "And now look what it became. A huge family, centers spread across the country, children growing up with true values, all because a hungry woman found a man with an open heart." Mr. Francis passed away peacefully a week later, sleeping peacefully in his room at the center. His last words were, "Tell Helen and Richard that I'll wait for them on the other side to keep taking care of our family." The funeral was a celebration of life. Hundreds of people attended, from elderly at the centers to government officials. Everyone wanted to pay tribute to the man who had helped build one of the most beautiful stories of love and solidarity in the country. "He was right," said Helen during the funeral speech. "Our story began in a dark pantry, but turned into a light that illuminates hundreds of lives." 15 years later, Helen and Richard, now with greying hair but young hearts, sat on the bench where Mr. Francis used to sunbathe every morning. Their 3 children, already teenagers, helped at the centres during school vacations. "Do you have any regrets?" asked Helen. "None. And you?" "Just one." Richard was startled. "Which one?" "I should have eaten those leftovers earlier," Helen laughed. "We could have started our story a few years sooner." Richard chuckled, hugging his wife. "I think everything happened at the right time. We weren't the right people before that night." "True. I needed to be desperate to accept help, and you needed to be empty to understand the value of helping. And now?" Now we're whole people, with a huge family, a clear purpose, and the certainty that we've made a difference in the world. 20 years after that early morning in the pantry, the Helen Carter Richard Thompson Foundation had become the largest elderly care network in the country. But more important than its size was the affection with which each elderly person was treated. Helen and Richard, now grandparents to 2 grandchildren, children of hope, remained active in managing the centers. Their 3 children had chosen careers that allowed them to continue the family mission. Hope was a geriatrician, Gabriel studied social administration, and Charity was studying psychology. "The family is growing," said Helen, watching her 2-year-old grandson playing with Mrs. Grace, now a centenarian but still lucid. "And the mission continues," Richard replied. "Now it's our children and grandchildren who will carry forward what we started. Do you think they understood the lesson?" "Look," Richard pointed to Gabriel helping a new elderly person settle into the center. "They not only understood it, they were born knowing it." That's the power of example. That evening, on the 20th anniversary of the original center, a special plaque was unveiled at the entrance. Founded in memory of all the elderly who once felt abandoned, in honor of those who chose to care, and in hope for the next generations who will continue this mission of love. Helen and Richard, hand in hand, read the plaque in silence. "Are you satisfied with what we've built?" Richard asked. "More than satisfied. I'm fulfilled." We turned a story of despair into a saga of love and hope. And it all started with you eating leftovers hidden in a pantry. And with you choosing to see humanity instead of judgment. I think that's the real lesson of our story. Small acts of kindness can change the world. And that true wealth isn't in what you accumulate, but in what you're able to give. They walked through the center's garden, watching elderly residents and staff preparing for bed. Another day of care, affection, and dignity was coming to an end. "You know what moves me most about this whole story," said Helen, stopping in front of the flower bed the elderly tended. "What?" "None of the elderly we care for today will go to sleep feeling abandoned. They all know they're loved, that they're important, that someone cares about them. That's why we do all this." "Exactly, so that no elderly person has to endure the humiliation of feeling like a burden, so that everyone knows that aging is a privilege, not a curse, and so that our society learns to value the wisdom that comes with age." Helen crouched down and picked a flower from the bed. "This flower reminds me of our story. It started as a small seed, almost imperceptible. But with care, love, and dedication, it grew and became something beautiful that brings joy to the eyes of everyone who passes by. And that inspires other people to plant their own flowers." "Exactly. Our story doesn't end with us. It spreads, multiplies, and renews itself with every life we touch." 25 years later, Helen and Richard, now retired from active management of the centers but still present as advisors, sat one last time on their Francis's bench to reflect on the journey. The foundation now operated in every state in the United States and had inspired similar initiatives in other countries of Latin America. Over 10,000 elderly people had found dignity and love in their centers over the years. If someone had told me 25 years ago that that night in the pantry would change so many lives, I would never have believed it, said Helen. Sometimes the biggest transformations start in the simplest and most unexpected moments, and sometimes we need to lose everything to find what truly matters. You lost your life in El Salvador. I lost my first marriage. But we gained a huge family and a purpose that gives meaning to everything. No, Richard, we didn't lose anything. We traded an empty life for a full one. We traded loneliness for family. We traded selfishness for generosity. And we traded leftovers for a feast of love. Helen smiled, remembering that distant night when she ate leftovers in hiding, dying of shame and hunger. Do you know what the greatest miracle of this whole story is? What? I never went hungry again, not for food, not for love, not for purpose. Since that night, my life has become a constant feast of achievements and affection. And I never felt empty again. Every day by your side, every elderly person we care for, every smile we bring, fills my soul in a way all the money in the world never could. So that's it. We really managed to turn leftovers into abundance, abandonment into family, despair into hope. And we proved that true wealth isn't in what you have in the bank, but in what you have in your heart. That night, as they prepared to sleep in their simple but cozy apartment, Helen and Richard said a prayer of gratitude. "Thank you for giving me the strength to carry on when I wanted to give up," said Helen. "Thank you for teaching me what really matters in life," added Richard. "Thank you for putting you in my path. Thank you for opening my eyes to true happiness. And may our story inspire others to find their own mission of love. Amen." End of story. And now, dear listeners, we would love to know what you thought of this story. Did it touch your hearts as it touched ours? Leave your reflections in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more moving stories. Thank you so much for your company.